mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about episodes 8 and 9 of the HBO limited series Station 11, entitled Who's There and Dr. Chaudhry, respectively. I found these two episodes to be pretty interesting in that they give me two things that I've kind of been wanting to see for the majority of this season, which is in year 20, these people coming together, which I didn't know I wanted this the whole time because I didn't know Clark and Elizabeth's status. I didn't know that they were still in the airport 20 years later until recently, but I wanted to see these characters kind of come together and kind of figure out who each other is or who each other are. Man, for somebody who's such a grammar Nazi like myself, I should be on that a little bit better. But seeing these characters come together and learn about one another is something I've been looking for from that aspect of the story, the year 20 aspect. But then I've also, and I think we all have been wondering what happened to Jeevan since probably episode 1, 2, something like that. So we got all those questions kind of answered in both of these episodes. I, for one, I don't know about you guys, but I, for one, have kind of been a bigger fan of any time Jeevan is on screen. I find him to be like the most relatable character. I'm going to go on a side tangent here real quick, but, he looks at the Station 11 book after he gets mauled by wolves, who I couldn't make that up. Well, literally it was made up, but he gets mauled by wolves and he puts this aluminum kind of like blanket thing on him to keep warm. And he opens up the book and he goes so pretentious at the book. And I love that line because I kind of feel like it's almost kind of like the show poking fun at itself, because I like at the same time as I do enjoy this show, I too find it to be pretentious at times. And he's the only character that I feel like kind of seems outside of that. Like, because even the characters within the story feel pretentious at times. Like, they're always speaking in riddles and shit like that. And it's like, sometimes the show gets a little bit too cute for itself. And I like Jeevan feeling like somebody who just feels like a regular fucking guy in the context, in a world of I don't want to say snobbery, but I don't know what else to say. It kind of feels that way at times, but I always find Jeevan's story compelling, and I always find his Jeevan-centric episodes to be the most interesting, and that doesn't change here. I thought episode 9 was the better of the two, and the more interesting and compelling of the two. But I'm going to talk about episode 8 first. I'm going to try to keep this a little bit brief. I just realized it's too daunting of a task to make videos for each episode, so it's better for me to kind of just talk about certain aspects of each episode that's released at the release time. Kind of late to be making this making this decision, but the only time I went out of that, I think, was episodes 4 and 5. I did videos for each of them respectively, even though they were released at the same time. All the rest, I think, are grouped how they released. But starting with episode 8, I was a little, I don't want to say troubled, but I know troubled seems better, I think, than I was going to say concerned, but I think troubled's a little bit better because I'm unsure in how I feel about it. But Kirsten and Tyler seem to be kind of bonding, and I don't know about you guys, but I still don't trust Tyler, and I feel like Kirsten is starting to do that. And again, this is a guy who I don't know about you guys. I said I don't know about you guys several times, but I don't believe him when he says he was not behind that plot to send those kids to kill Gil, that kid suicide bombing. I don't believe him. And he's so intent on destroying the past that he's willing to do a whole lot of nefarious shit, but they're bonding over this book, and it's like it doesn't feel good to me. Because it feels like they're bonding over negativity and pessimism and anger and all of these things. And and when I say it doesn't feel good to me, I don't mean that I think the show is doing a bad job of this. I think the show is doing a great job of this, and because I think we're meant to feel conflicted. But that seeing them kind of almost bond, it's like the show is almost trying to paint Tyler in a positive light, and I'm concerned that that this is the one time that Kirsten's going to let her guard down and it's gonna not work out for her. And I feel like the show is kind of putting us in a place where we should feel like it should work out for her, like there should be some sort of happy ending, but I don't really know if that's where we're going. And it's just uncomfortable for me to see, like, Tyler's the kind of guy who like despite what he says, he sent these suicide bomber kids, right? It's not a stretch for me to believe he's capable of doing much more than that. He holds a high level of resentment toward his mother, a high level of resentment toward Clark. He blows up this tower, which, well, I'll get to that later, but he blows up this tower, and he's just so vengeful and spiteful and wants to destroy everything pre-pandemic. And seeing Kirsten, who has her own issues with the past, well, I'll save this for the episode 9 discussion, but she's got her own trust issues. She from various different I'm just all over the place right now, from various sources that have caused her to kind of be mistrusting, and that's aided her so far. That's how she stopped Tyler in the first place, was just being overly cautious. But now she seems like she's kind of letting her guard down because of this book. And I am going to jump to episode 9 briefly, but we see her do the same thing, let her guard down over this book. And it didn't end well then, and it might not end well now. So I'm a little concerned about this relationship, but I think that we're meant to be concerned. There's just a whole lot to be mistrusting over as it pertains to Tyler. Let's see, what else did I want to talk about here? So kind of like on another note, as far as like Kirsten being overly suspicious, she's coming with an entirely different energy than the rest of the group, who's been there for presumably a couple of days. They're speaking highly of Elizabeth. They're speaking highly of being able to stay there. The one guy says that she gave him like a sewing machine. Like, everyone seems to be like really kind of like happy and content. And she comes in on some like mad conspiracy shit, like they're holding Sarah hostage in order to force you to perform this play. And I think that like part of that is true. Like maybe Clark's motivation is somewhere around there, but Elizabeth seems to be on the up and up to me. Like, she seems to genuinely just want to do what's best for the people. She talks about the people want to open the doors. She talks about wanting to do the play, and Clark says something to the effect of like he doesn't want to do the play anymore because he's concerned that like the kids are going to pick up on messages in Hamlet that could potentially, I guess, lessen his power. And I'm going to talk about Clark a little bit later, but I think Elizabeth is largely on the up and up, but Kirsten comes in with all these like conspiracy theories and shit. Like I think they're doing all these things, and it's not healthy, I don't think. And again, I could be wrong. Like maybe she's right to be distrusting in this case, but like it just kind of feels like Kirsten is stuck on not trusting in situations where maybe she should, and being trusting in situations where maybe she shouldn't. And I could be reading it wrong, but I think there's no way for us to really know until we see what happens in the finale. But yeah, I don't know. I don't feel good about Kirsten's decisions within the context of the show. I think the show is doing a great job of creating this kind of like tension based upon not confusion necessarily, but uncertainty, I think would be the best word to use. I really like the scene where Clark makes Kirsten and Tyler kind of perform a scene to, I guess, prove that they're really actors. They pull a scene from the book, which they both know. There's so much going on in that scene because it's layered. Like Succession does this a lot with layered scenes where there's like a lot of subtext and things that elevate the scene that aren't there on the surface, but that you pick up on from knowing the characters and knowing the story. And them choosing to perform a scene from the book, I think it is interesting because we still don't know at this point in the episode how like Tyler's motivations, how much he knows, what he's being truthful about, what he isn't. He does a good job of covering when Clark hits him with a Hamlet line, and he's able to respond, like that little quick test. And then on top of that, when they're performing the scene too, the scene has a dual meaning too, where it ties in with their actual real life experiences. And I talked about that last episode or last video, I should say, about how this show is that book. I mean, and it's deeper than sharing the name. Like the show's called Station 11, book's called Station 11. The themes of the book, the narratives in the book, all of these things that happen in this book, they are taking place in real life. So I like the fact that Kirsten and Tyler were having a conversation as characters in the book, but we're also kind of having a conversation as two people. And I like when you have that kind of like layered subtext within a scene. So I thought that scene was really cool. Now I'm going to talk about something I didn't like, which was, we find out in this episode, I didn't like an aspect of this, but I do like the scene itself. So at some point, Tyler comes across Kirsten and he's like, yo, I've seen your friend. I'm going to lead you to her. And even then, I think we were supposed to be suspicious because he's like, yeah, she's right down there. I'm like, is she going to go down there and he's going to like shoot her in the back or something? Like, even then, I didn't trust him. But she goes down there and her and Sarah share a pretty good scene. But what I didn't like is the fact that we did learn that Sarah had a heart attack in this episode. And why I didn't like that is because if you watch the video I did for the last 2 episodes, I didn't like the fact that I felt like they wanted to play whatever happened with Sarah as being emotional and impactful and something that we should feel a certain way about. But I felt like it was unnecessarily unclear what was happening to her, because it was like 1 minute she seemed drunk, then the next minute she's like falling out. I'm like, what's happening? Like, did something happen to her? Is she having a heart attack? Like, I don't know. But all I know is like 1 minute I thought she was drunk, and the next minute I'm like, okay, I don't even know if she's alive anymore. So like, I find out in this episode that she's still alive. And I don't like that because it sucked the drama and emotion out of that scene. Like if they had just let us know that she was having a heart attack, then the scene could have been like, and it could have been simple, like a simple chest clutch. But I felt like she just kind of like looked in pain and toppled over. But like if she had like clutched at her chest or something, I can be like, oh, maybe she's having a heart attack. And then I can be left with the tension of like, oh shit, is Sarah about to die? But I was so confused in that scene with what was happening to her because they had done the drunk stuff earlier that it took away any gravity that scene might have had. And this show does that a lot, where they leave out important things and then they explain it later. And you're in that moment left wondering, what does this mean? And you might not find out until the next episode. You might not find out until 4 episodes later. And I think that's overdoing that. I think is not the best decision, because it takes a lot of the weight and the gravity out of some of these scenes that are meant to have more of an impact. And that Sarah scene lost its impact. And just to find out, just like offhand, like, oh, Sarah had a heart attack. It's like, okay, like, could you have fumbled that any more than you did? Because like, with being confusing about what was happening with her at the time, it took out any gravity from that scene itself. And then it makes the fact that she actually did have a heart attack feel like, you don't get to experience that, oh shit, this is what's happening to Sarah moment, because they're confusing in the moment and then they just mention it offhand in the next episode. So now it doesn't feel like a big deal. And then even now it's like they have this scene. I'm like, okay, was this like almost like a death scene for her? Because she says to not tell them about her death until after the play. And I'm like, but you still alive? I'm like, so is this supposed to be like a goodbye, a farewell conversation? And it doesn't have to be a super thing where she's like, tell them, don't tell them I'm dead until after the play. Like, it doesn't have to be like that. But like, again, the confusion here, not confusion, but the lack of clarity here, again, I think deflates a scene that could have been better than it was. A final conversation between two people who mean a lot to one another, whereas it kind of just like I was left wondering, like, okay, so am I to assume that she's gonna die off screen? Like, I don't know. That's when I say I feel like this show gets too cute for itself at times. Like you don't have to be confusing for the sake of confusing. Like, because like now that's like a second scene involving Sarah that was supposed to have some weight and it didn't, because they purposely chose to not be clear about what was happening. And that's something that this show has done a lot, actually. And I don't particularly care for it, even though I enjoy the show. And what I want to say about Clark is I think Clark is such an interesting character, because this is a guy with like an immense amount of self-doubt, right? And that self-doubt manifests in like really interesting ways because he's so paranoid. Like what I mentioned about him not wanting the kids to be influenced by Hamlet and wanting to call the whole playoff just because he feels like he's going to lose something there. And then we have these flashback scenes with Arthur, which I found really interesting because, he Arthur kind of tells him like, I don't like this corporate shit. I like when we were just creating stuff and things were simpler, and you're kind of being like a macho kind of corporate douchebag kind of guy. And and then Clark comes back with, I think both of them make good points in this scene, by the way. Clark comes back and he's kind of like, well, you like people like that because you can dominate them. And Clark, being somebody with so much self-doubt, is undoubtedly laying all of his issues at Arthur's feet. And he's and what he experiences in this episode, he's probably gonna, in his head, like mentally do mental gymnastics to make it Arthur's fault. Like I shouldn't have let him manipulate me or get me riled up. But at the end of the day, he was getting texts from whoever this Tim guy is. Maybe it's the guy that we saw in like episode 2. I don't know, but his somebody he's dating, saying like, hey, remember how Arthur gets you riled up, so contain yourself. But then Clark goes in that situation. He allows himself to get riled up. He allows himself to start drinking. He allows himself to apparently do some coke. He allows himself to apparently have sex with a random guy who he kicks out in the morning. And then he allows himself, I can't even say the morning. He kicks this guy out in the afternoon thinking it's the morning because he got so shit-faced. And then he comes out and shit talks Arthur in front of his wife and kid. And all of those things are Clark's fault. And they all revolve around his insecurity. And that's why I think Clark is such an interesting, complex character. But so Clark had a good episode as well. So wrapping up episode 8 thoughts real quick. How did Tyler escape capture? Like, now we know that he went through jetways or whatever. He's like, I know how to get through, all around the airport through these different jetways, but he was physically captured. So how did he get an opportunity to escape through a jetway? I kind of feel like that's something important that we should have at least heard about. I mean, I would have liked to have at least seen it, but if I'm not going to see it, at least let me, hear like, I knocked out this guy. Like what happened? Like, did he knock out that Miles guy? Like, what did he do? And I'd like to have known about that. So during the scene that him and Kirsten do in front of Clark, he takes his video game thing, the little thing. It looks like a Sony PSP kind of. He takes that thing, but then he later uses that to somehow blow up the tower. And I'm wondering how did I miss something here? Or is this one of those things that this show fucked up again by giving me something that doesn't make sense, but it's supposed to be important in the moment, that they're just going to explain in the next episode, which it deflates both things. Because I'm sitting here like, how did he use his video game? Because I even rewound it. I'm like, did he not grab a video game? But the thing was labeled like portable video game or something like that. So like he grabbed the video game, but he somehow used it to blow up the tower. And I'm like, I don't, did he plant something in the tower back when he was a kid? But how could he control that with a video game? And is it, even then, is like, okay, is it a video game / kind of like a, maybe like a Nintendo Switch where he could maybe go on the internet on it too, and maybe he could use that, but I don't know. It's too unclear. And, I could take away from that scene, like, holy shit, he blew up the museum. This guy really wants to erase the past. Yeah, I could take all those things away from it, but it still deflates the gravity of the scene for me to have to even wonder, how did he do this? How did he escape in the first place? How did he blow this? Like, what was in the tower that he blew up? How did he activate it from his video game? Like, all of these questions that I think the show intentionally leaves unanswered, not because it's not necessary, but because they're trying to be too cute. And like, I don't understand why, that's something you could be clear about. You can plant the seeds earlier for what that might have been. Maybe there's a scene where you see him in a tower and he's like taping something underneath a table, or I don't know, anything to where I can then go, when it explodes, I can go, oh, that's what he was doing in that previous scene. But they don't even give me that. So I don't know. Like I said, this show gets too cute for itself at times. And I thought it was interesting too that Arthur said that he wasn't actually cheating on Miranda with Elizabeth. I don't know if that's going to come up again, but I did find that to be an interesting thing to kind of just throw into that episode. So moving on to episode 9, let's see, we reveal what happened to Jeevan, but this kind of really revolves around Jeevan kind of like learning who he is and becoming that guy. This is a guy who struggles with commitment, but he also really wants to help people. And yeah, I think this episode kind of even does a little bit more to show why he hopped up on that stage in episode 1 to help Arthur. Like, this is a guy who wants to help. He's a healer. He wants to be a healer, but he just doesn't have he doesn't have the literal teachings to do it. And he ends up in these situations because of that. Like, he wanted to help Arthur and he wasn't really able to, but then that's how he came across Kirsten, and then he ended up wanting to help her, and then that's how he ends up essentially just like with her tagging along for all this time. And he holds resentment toward that. And he says something to the effect of like, I've been stuck to you this whole time, and I was just supposed to be taking you home. I haven't been able to make an adult decision for myself, which kind of sounds selfish to me, but I think that's just like the complexity of Jeevan. It's like, he wants to help, but at the same time, he wants to be able to do his own thing too. So, but we see him kind of come into his own. But before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about this leaving Jeevan thing, because Kirsten says that, Frank told me that was your name. Are you going to leave? She said, are you leaving, Jeevan? And he I don't even think he responds necessarily in that scene, but he does end up leaving. And I think that gives an interesting kind of way of looking at how their relationship ended, because we now know what happened, but neither one of them does. And I think that's interesting to kind of look at how they interpret what happened between them as adults, like how they look back on that. So from Kirsten's perspective, they had an argument over the book, which this was a valid argument to me. I feel like they were playing Jeevan like to kind of be an asshole in this scene, but he could have died because she can't stop reading this book for the 9 million fucking time. Like, I'd have threw the fucking book away too at that point. Like, I'm like, okay, you've read this shit 9 million times, and now you're so distracted reading this book that I could have died because you're not paying attention. He was completely justified in tossing the book. But he tosses the book, and there's a good fight between them. Well, I don't want to say a good fight, but it's a good scene that is a fight scene. And he says, no, she says, we left Frank's because of you. And then he says, yeah, but we left the day too late because we stayed for your fucking play. And that's a really loaded statement, because and she tears up in that moment, because that statement is essentially saying it's your fault Frank's dead. Like, we would have left earlier and that would have been fine. And that's what we see in that episode. Adult Kirsten saying, like, leave a day earlier. Like, don't hang around for the play. But they have that tension. They fight over the book, and he said, he's kind of just like, fuck the book. But then he relents and he goes to get it. But from her perspective, all she knows is they fought over the book and then he's gone. And then presumably she doesn't see him again. So adult Kirsten is dealing with that abandonment from Jeevan. And she's looking like, okay, I lost Arthur. I lost Frank. I lost Jeevan. And these are all things that she might hold herself personally responsible for. Like, she can't hold herself personally responsible for Arthur. She could feel guilty for not being able to say bye to him, but she could hold herself personally responsible for Frank. And now she could hold herself personally responsible for Jeevan, because they could, like, maybe if I hadn't fucked up with that book, he wouldn't have left on me, which is how she might look at it. So I think that's interesting. And then from Jeevan's perspective, he doesn't know that she's okay. The compass was there on the table. He might look at that as a sign, like, maybe like she left that for him as to say, like, I left this. So if Jeevan comes back, he's going to know that I left on my own volition. Like, I wasn't captured or dead or anything. Well, she might be after she leaves, but at least he knows that she left that there for him on purpose in case he comes back. And he can have that peace of mind. But at the end of the day, he doesn't know what happened to her. And again, from his perspective, he might even look at it the same way she looks at it. Like, he might be looking like, the last thing Kirsten thinks is that I left pissed off about that book, and maybe she thinks I just bailed on her. So I like giving some context to their departure and how that could affect both of them in year 20, looking back on how they ended things, and just feel like dealing with any feelings of guilt, which they both probably are. Let's see. So I talked about the book and how, that was played as an overreaction. Oh, Oh, I talked about how they have different perspectives on how they separated, so that was another thing. So I was kind of rolling there for a minute. Um, so he later gets while he's going to get the book, he gets mauled by wolves, which is so fucking random, and he gets taken to this weird kind of like shelter for pregnant women. And I was confused at first because I thought these were all women that had just formed a community. I'm like, how are they all pregnant? Like they got one man and he just busting off in all of them. But later a woman comes up like, is this the place? So apparently like this place is known around this area as a place of refuge for women who are pregnant. And we find out that they had to amputate part of Jeevan's foot, not the whole foot, I don't think. At first I thought it was, but when I looked at it again, it looked like it was just like the toes part of his foot. Had to amputate his foot. He's about to leave, and again, his just burning desire to be helpful. He can't just go because this woman comes up and she's asking for help. He puts her in his wheelchair and hobbles his ass pushing the wheelchair. Like this is a guy who just has to help people. And he goes around this, he spends time in this place. He starts to know these women by name. He gets what I think is kind of like a flirty little relationship with the one woman who shot him in the head with the beanbag. And he starts to build a relationship with these women. And when they all go into labor, he's kind of going from person to person. And he's not being a doctor. He's not, over here. He's just kind of like trying. But he's giving that energy of just like, I'm here for you. And you see Jeevan kind of coming into his own, like this is how I become great. Because he has hangups over his sister being a doctor, his brother being a Pulitzer Prize winner, and him just being a fucking loser who uses their credit cards. But now he's coming to his own. He's found a place to be a healer and to help people. And I think that's a good ending for Jeevan. So that was really interesting direction to take his character as well, because at the end we see that he actually now has, in year 20, he's still alive and he has a family. He's with that same woman. Presumably she gave birth to a boy. I don't think they're clear on that, but he refers to a Frank, so I can only assume that she gave birth to a boy and they named him after Frank. And then he has a daughter and I think another son. And it's just a good ending for Jeevan. I don't know if they're gonna reunite possibly in year 20 in the finale, but I kind of think that they won't, and I think that's okay. Jeevan seems to be at peace with where he left Kirsten. He seems to be at peace with the time that he spent helping people in that place, and he seems to be at peace with his family. And that's, I think, one of the more refreshing things to come out of this show. The show is kind of, I think I've seen people kind of build it as almost like a positive take on what can happen in a pandemic. And I ain't seen none of that shit. Like this shit's been wholly like doom and gloom to me up until this point, because we start to see people being able to start fresh and come together and build something new. Like we see that in this store or whatever where they're having the pregnant women at. They're starting new life, starting new generations, rebuilding, starting over. And that's good. That's good to see. And we see Jeevan kind of have a happy ending. And I think that's that's encouraging to see that even though it took 20 years, people are starting to kind of get past this and start over and start living again. And I think that's kind of what the show wants us to kind of take from that. So I don't think I have anything else about this episode. No, I don't. So I'm gonna give my thoughts again, my little random thoughts, and then I'll wrap this one up. So, I already mentioned the one, how I love how he said so pretentious when he yelled at the book. I like the scene where he hugs what we can now presume is his future wife. I thought that was a good scene just because there's not a lot said there, but he said something like, "I need your help," and then they hug, and that's I love that scene because she sheds a single tear, but I think they both needed that. But Jeevan particularly needed that because he spent the entirety of this show helping other people when he's clearly not someone who's very cut out for it. When I say cut out for it, he's good at helping people, but he's not good in like pressure situations. Like he's like a worry wart kind of. He's not cool under pressure. So it's taking a lot for him to help Frank and to help Kirsten and to help these women. And I think in that one moment for him to ask for help, I think was just a really good moment of growth for his character to kind of be like, I've been helping all these other people, but at the end of the day, I've lost my brother. I lost this kid. I don't know where she is. And he probably still feels like, even though he's helped a lot of people, he probably still feels like a bit of a failure. Like he failed Frank, he failed Kirsten, and he's like, I need help right now. And that hug was enough. So I thought that was a really nice scene. And then lastly, that shot of the baby being born. I don't know if that was a real shot or if that was something maybe that they created for the show. I can't see somebody necessarily, like, how do you time that? Like, hey, let's get a shot of somebody giving birth in real time. But I could say, as someone who has seen it in real life, it looked pretty fucking real to me. So yeah, that was kind of crazy that they put that on there. Not crazy. There's YouTube videos and stuff like that of well, I don't know if they're on YouTube, but there's videos of like women giving birth. My wife watches them a lot, and there's an audience for that kind of thing, but you never see it that directly in anything, television or film. So for them to just like just put that out there like that, it made me wonder, is this real or is this something that like, like some sort of effect or whatever? But I can say from experience, it did look real. So that's all I got for these 2 episodes. I'm already at a half an hour, so I'm going to wrap this one up, and I'll see you guys next week for the finale. Peace.